This is Wretched Radio with Todd Friel.
The election results are in.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is titled
Oh, the humanity.
Film at 11.
And this is breaking news. This is Wretched Radio. Okay, arguably, which is a phrase that is always used to say, not definitively, but arguably, Friel, we know what the word means, arguably, a bigger election than the 2020 elections. Why? Because this was an election inside of the largest Protestant denomination in the country, voting for different offices, in particular the high-profile office, of course, of presidency, hotly contested, being scrutinized from a lot of different angles because the implications are big. The New York Times recognized that, claiming that the Southern Baptists narrowly head off conservative takeover. So the world is indeed interested in what is happening, and we should be far more so because this is Christ's church, and we care about the church. And whilst denominations aren't biblically mandated, I think they're almost God's concession. You people can't seem to get along in complete unity, so I'll let you have denominations. And so we like to see these denominations solid, strong. It is not good when we see a big organization slip-sliding away. And so all eyes were on the Southern Baptist Convention, in particular, the resolution on critical race theory, in particular, the issue of role of women in the church, in particular, sexual abuse, and in particular, the presidential election. Don't know if you've heard, it went to 2 rounds. The first round, it had, we'll just say, 3 opponents. And this is extraordinarily important. If you will, on the left side of the spectrum, you had a fellow running named Ed Litton. The centrist was Dr. Al Mohler. The guy who's being considered hard right, I would just say he's conservative, is Pastor Mike Stone of Blackshear, Georgia, Emmanuel Baptist Church. And the vote, the first round, I think this was a shock to a lot of people. Al Mohler was not moved forward. 2 men were, the guy on the left, the guy on the right. Which way would the people in the middle go? The second round revealed they went to the left. And it was a 52-47 victory for what we'll just call, and please don't align this with like Democrats, because that would be silly, but they are more leaning to the left on issues like critical race theory and maybe other issues. But 52-47, that's pretty tight. And the questions before us now are, what does this mean, and what's the future for the SBC? To answer that question, it's a joy to have on the telephone aforementioned pastor, Mike Stone. Mike, good morning. I suspect that you're a little bit poopticated.
I am. There have been some long days and late nights, but I'm a long-time listener and fan of your show. It's a privilege to be with you.
Okay, well, let's see if we can not wreck that opinion. All right, Mike, here's what I want to understand, because you're obviously an insider. You're with a man in the middle of this horse race. You know SBC far more than I do. Help those of us on the outside looking in. What is the significance of the 52-47 vote?
Well, I think it shows that there are deep fractures, and there remain to be some different views and visions for the future of the Southern Baptist Convention. I'm a pastor from a town of about 4,000 people, and until I got in this race, I was little known outside of my own state and maybe a couple of adjacent states. And I was in this race against some highly known people. I think most listeners would believe that Al Mohler is the most recognizable name in the Southern Baptist Convention, maybe for the last 20 to 25 years. And I ended up running against not only the entire machine of the Southern Baptist Convention, but the mainstream media itself, secular media, and to still be able to come in and pull off 47 to 48% in the very first year is quite telling. I saw somebody had put on Twitter that we got into the Super Bowl our very first year, lost by a field goal, and Lucy was the one holding the football. And so that's just a little bit of perspective that deep divisions still remain. And I also I think it shows a lack of being in touch between some of the elite leadership in the SBC and the rank and file folks out in the pews.
I'm hearing then, this is my interpretation of what you just said, you're actually encouraged, not discouraged.
Todd, I am deeply encouraged, especially when you consider all that was coming against this more conservative movement in the first year of our existence, to get within striking distance with some of the things that were thrown against us. I do understand that every pastor who has these concerns does not share that perspective. There are some who are already talking about leaving the convention, and I just want to encourage them that if you leave, you don't have a voice. And we're talking about the largest non-Catholic denomination in the United States of America. It is a deeply important movement and convention of churches, and I think it's worth hanging around and fighting for. And I am greatly encouraged about the prospects of a more conservative movement within the SBC.
If you had to prognosticate, what do you believe is the immediate future, and I'll define immediate as the next 2 years until the next presidential election. What is your hope for the future, and what do you think the future is for the SBC?
Well, I think the SBC is at a crossroads. We're having to determine which direction we're going to go. There was so much talk this year about being reminded that the world is watching. And I do think we should be keenly and greatly concerned about our testimony. That's a biblical thing, that our light will shine in the darkness and men would see our good works, glorify our Father. I know all the verses that people would use to talk about the importance of our witness. But I think it's more important that we recognize not just that a lost, unregenerate world is watching, but that our Heavenly Father is watching. There seem to be too many instances where we're more concerned about trying to be sure that lost people think nicely of us than to do those things consistent with what Jude called the faith once for all delivered to the saints. I'll give you just a real quick illustration of that. Critical race theory with Resolution 9, which I know your listeners would be familiar with largely, specifically stated that critical race theory and intersectionality were analytical tools. Thousands of messengers came to the convention this year to address that, and the Resolutions Committee would not call critical race theory by its name. They wanted to pass and did pass a resolution just renouncing all unbiblical theories and ideologies, but they did not want to be specific. One of the leaders from the platform said that this could be compared to evolution, that evolution is also an unbiblical theory. But Todd, the reality is Southern Baptists are not recently on record saying that evolution and Darwinism is a helpful analytical tool to help exegete the creation account of Genesis 1 and 2. So when you have specific issues before the church, I think we need to call these things by their name. And that may seem a small thing to some people, but I think there are issues like that are going to continue to raise their head within the Southern Baptist Convention until leaders stand up and deal with these things specifically and by name.
So in the next 2 years, will we be seeing a break off from the SBC?
I don't think so. I think there will be certainly some individual congregations who will leave, but I think the more conservative elements within the Southern Baptist Convention are going to find themselves energized, motivated, because we see that in a year where there was so much slander and accusation and opposition to our movement, we still came within striking distance. So I think it shows that really raising our voices and having a voice is a very workable plan within the Southern Baptist Convention.
Pastor Mike Stone, who was a candidate for the SBC president, sharing what he thinks the future holds. I would like to know, sir, the individuals who are very much in favor of CRT have threatened prior to the convention that if it is denounced, they would split. Resolution 2 did not mention CRT, but clearly it was intended to say, no, we're going to submit to the Bible. Did that satisfy them?
Well, the early indications are that it is, that it does satisfy them, which, again, just shows some of the divide in the convention, that you will accept a certain theory as long as it's not renounced by name. And I believe in preaching with specificity. I preach verse by verse through books of the Bible, and I frequently come to the state to my church that it's specificity that offends. There's a lot of preaching, and frankly, Todd, there are a lot of resolutions out of the Southern Baptist Convention that can be so vague and so nebulous that they don't convict those that are guilty of violating that biblical principle, and they don't encourage those who are faithful. They're just so vague and nameless. And so I think this issue is going to stay with us. Please,
within 20 seconds, respond to the accusations against you that you were involved in covering up sexual abuse scandals.
Those allegations are as offensive as they are false. As a sexual abuse survivor myself, the notion that I would seek to cover up sexual abuse is absurd. And I would just quickly point out the only allegations that come to the executive committee are allegations that are already publicly known, so there is not a possibility, therefore, to cover them up.
Pastor Mike Stone, fighting the good fight, trying to be as biblical as possible in the SBC, which means he needs our prayers, and so do all of the fellas that are fighting alongside of him, and we need to be praying for the SBC. This is Wretched Radio.
Hello, Maria. This is Todd Friel from your auto insurance company, noticing you're not taking advantage of any of our life insurance policies. Really? Oh, really? You're not afraid to die? That's funny. Listen to this clip from Paul Washer.
I'm talking about you.
So what do you think of that, Maria?